Jalen Daniels was sitting on mastery down in Manhattan last Saturday. I thought his ability to see it, react to it, the throws, one that specifically that stands out was he escapes the pocket to the right, jukes a guy, hand overs him, dumps it off for the check down. They get 7 yards. And then on top of that, the throw from the right hash to the left sidelines to Trevor Wilson was an absolute rocket. It's a kind of throw that I thought they should have stopped the game, like when LeBron broke the scoring record and just walked out there and said, give me that ball. We need to wait a second to think about what just happened. I mean, it was one of the throws. I've not seen a throw in person as impressive as that. Talk about what you've seen in JD. And I thought that was as good as he's been since the Liberty Bowl in terms of just play-for-play greatness. He was awesome.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Welcome to the Booth Review. I am your host, Brandon McAnderson, and I am joined by your former host, Kent Swanson. Back to work together, back to talk some Jayhawk football, back to get into all things KU, K-State football. How you feeling, Kent? Welcome to the show.
B-Mac, I cannot tell you how much I've missed doing this show with you. I am so excited to be on. I know things have not been necessarily from a record perspective as what we'd hope for, but I love Kansas football. I love it still. Good times and bad. I mean, you and me, we've been fans our whole lives, and we've been through a lot.
Yep.
And I mean, you especially playing, but man, I'm excited to be talking KU football with you, man.
Yeah, I am so glad to have you here. You're the perfect person for all the things I want to talk about, especially football as a whole. But let's talk first about KU, K-State. Tough loss. Very similar to some of the other losses, you know, playing a K-State team that just does not make mistakes. They just don't show up and lose. You have to beat them. And they did some things that were show up and lose-ish. You know, they fumbled down in the red zone. They dropped a touchdown. So they didn't play a perfectly clean game themselves either. So they gave Kansas some opportunities. Kansas is a football team that on any given set of drives looks like one of the best teams in the country. Just flat out. They're sometimes able to get stops in a way that some of the best teams in the country get. They're able to transition those into touchdowns. Some of the best teams in the country do. I'm thinking about that first drive on the road in Manhattan. They convert 3 third downs, 2 of them on the ground, a third via check down. Just a team that was able to make things happen and move the football. I could not be more impressed in terms of what they were able to accomplish against a really good K-State defense. Yeah.
Man, I felt really good about what you were seeing, you know, specifically on the offensive side of football, like you're talking about. It really looked a lot like what Kansas football has been when they've had their success over the last couple of years. You know, watching, like you said, that opening drive, 11 plays, 75 yards, 6 minutes off the clock. That's a quintessential Kansas football drive under Lance Leipold and just, you know, hey, look, putting themselves in really good third and manageable situations, converting a 3rd and 2, a 3rd and 4, and then ultimately making a great play call and running the football on that 3rd and 8 for Sebby Morrison to score. Like, yeah, that was the kind of stuff that we were used to. I felt, man, it's felt last couple weeks that this offense has started to kind of get their footing under them a little bit more. They're not making the same mistakes. They're not making mistakes that's leading to, to inconsistencies. And then I think the play calling has been pretty good. Like, I know it's a pretty polarizing conversation right now. I really like the direction the play calling is headed as the season went on. And I know it's been rough, but it's been good, man. Like, I don't know what to tell you. It's been good. And like, I know it's so frustrating for some people hearing this right now, but like, I'm impressed with what this team was doing. You look at some of the net success rate kind of statistics. Kansas actually outperformed Kansas State on both sides of the football in this. Like, if you're looking on it, and it's like, they've had a few of these games this season. It's the same consistent trend that we've seen with this football team. But man, like, it does feel like things are looking a lot better than they did the beginning of the season.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because it is not only an eye test thing. Like, the statistics support that this team is as good or better than they were last year on offense and defense, which is, it's what I've mentioned many times on this podcast. What you understand as well is that college football is hard. Mm-hmm. And like, these like Cinderella, like everything worked perfectly seasons that Kansas has been experiencing, where they are more advanced, where they are ahead of schedule. Now you're really seeing the other side of that. It's not that the team is way worse. It's not that they made a terrible choice at offensive coordinator. It's not that, the quarterback's this, that, and the third. It's that winning football games in college is hard. The margin of error is small, and they have not been able to put things together in a way that's been resulted in playing winning football. But they are the same team. They have rebuilt some things in ways that I don't think people are really talking about. And I only want to talk about it because I feel like our fan base is starting to drift from reality in some ways. I'm starting to see a lot of this will be a tumultuous offseason. I'm seeing heads got to roll. What's happened to this? And I'm like, that none of that's happening. This will be, I think we should be, the way you should be feeling about the games is very true. Like, this has been disheartening. It's been disappointing. It's been a letdown. But there is the optimism, what we should have in place about what we think this program is going to be, should be as high as it's ever been. I honestly feel like Kansas football, when you look at it as a whole, you'll see these things that go well, right? And we'll grasp onto them so hard because we don't know when they'll be good again, right? You don't know when they'll be playing winning football. You don't know when they'll be playing important games again. So when you have that vacancy, you start to let your mind wander about all the different disappointments that you've had as a fan, all the different letdowns that you have as a fan. And I relate to all of that. But I'm also saying that if you look at some of the young players in this program, Kent, you look at some of the young players in this program and what they're going to be in 3 or 4 years, and you look at where they are now, you think about it, Kansas loses something, how do they replace it? Because the conversation at the beginning of the season was, oh, how do you replace a guy like Kotelnicki? Look what he's doing at Penn State. We'll never get this back again. We will rue the day. Not so much. This offense is about the same as they were last year. And I'm going to give you some stats. You don't have to agree with me. Yards per rush last year, 5.3 yards. Yards per rush this year, 5.5. That's including Bryce Foster as the number one rated center per Pro Football Focus, and Michael Ford Jr. is the number one left guard per Pro Football Focus. How about sack percentage? How many sacks are we giving up? We're giving up less than last year. The sacks percentage is less than last year. I think at one point, let's see, in the last 3 games, the sacks percentage is 2.35%. That's number 15 nationally. So this offensive line is performing very well in terms of yards per carry and protecting the quarterback. Last year, 23, 202 yards rushing per game. This year, 194. Third down percentage conversions, 47% last year, 50% this year. Passing yards per game, 222 last year, 227 this year. Passing yards per completion, 16 yards last year, monster number. Only at 12.3 right now, but over the last 3 weeks, it's at 15 yards per completion. Points per play, 0.532 in 23, 0.541 in 24. Completion percentage, 62.9 last year. Only 56% this year. They struggled to throw the ball well. The last 3 games, 62.65%, almost identical to what they did last year. Points per game, 33.7 last year, 27.4 this year. But guess what they've done over the last 3? 33.3 points per game. So they have literally rebuilt this entire offense in the same way that it was built under Kotelnicki. You can't just talk about what you've seen from the offense. What gives you optimism about them being able to build a successful offense, and how you see this season going for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that I've just kind of, and look, I mean, I'm coming in like, what is this? This is week 8 of the season now, something like that, and I'm gonna have to spew a bunch of takes here, I guess, right? But
please,
I looked at some of the stuff that this offense was doing earlier in the year, and I didn't think the identity aligned with where they're at now. Like, I think they've slowly started to find their identity a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I think they were trying to throw the ball a little bit too much of what we've seen, like the vertical passing game. Let's just get up, let's throw the ball up a little bit. Like Jalen Daniels was leading on that, and that, trying to, keep that chemistry with some of the back shoulder stuff and some of the downfield stuff. And that's great and all, but that could also lead to some up and downs and some inconsistencies. But like, when you look at what this team has done a little bit more lately, I think they've done a better job of utilizing the middle of the field in the passing game. I think they've done a better job utilizing the tight ends, getting them involved a little bit more. I think that's been really nice. Not that they don't have the vertical passing game Quentin Skinner got wide open on that post route, right? But it feels like there's been more footing for the offense from a consistencies perspective, because like they think they're starting to utilize the entirety of the field a little bit more in the passing game. There's still some outside throws and outside minded throws that I think kind of ties to some of the stuff that Jeff Grimes has done at other locations in the past, and especially down the field. I mean, it just feels like, after last week, they really were starting to find, the last couple weeks, starting to find some real rhythm in the middle of the field, utilizing those tight ends a little bit more. And that's kind of led to, I think, an increase in offensive explosion, really good balance, really good, consistency on, in some of these third down situations like last week. And it's starting to look a lot more like what we saw, last year. And I think there was, some stylistic stuff that made it feel a little bit different this early on in the season, but man, they've really come along strong. And 28, 27, 31, 42, 27 in the last 5 games. They've really, they've slowly come along. And I think about the West Virginia game, that little reverse to Luke Grimm has started to feel like, oh, they're finding some of those things that really kind of help them, build on what they've done in the past. So I'm bullish on the Kansas offense, and I think they've made strides. They've gotten better over the course of the season. I think you just wish that they were better over the course of the season and win some of these one-score games that they've been losing.
Yeah, man. It's the stats tell you one thing, the eye test tell you one thing, and the result tells you a whole different thing. But when you wear home field apparel, the results are always excellent. Just incredibly comfortable. The licensing, the vintage college design, some of the best stuff you can find. Over 150 colleges. They got unique logos, Orange Bowl stuff, different Jayhawks, the angry Jayhawk, the Jayhawk with the cute legs. I don't know what you call that Jayhawk. I'll call it the Jayhawk with the cute legs. Perfect for showing your pride at the football game, man. You go out there and they got the tailgate and all that. Man, you better be in some home field apparel, because that's what's going to keep you fresh. That's what's going to keep your friends asking, man, where did you get that shirt? Homefieldapparel.com. That's homefieldapparel.com. Mention code PAYHEED24.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Welcome back to the show. We talked about this offensive resurgence and what we expect to continue. We gave you some of the stats, but it really starts with Jalen Daniels and his ability to make plays with his arms and his feet. One of the things that I associate quarterback mastery with is risk calculation. Mm-hmm. And to use the example was last year's Sunday night game, Kansas City versus the Titans. The Titans beat the Chiefs schematically pretty much every single down. And Mahomes would have to maneuver, buy time, throw to space. It was literally his risk calculation versus the Titans defense. The Titans defense even this year is very good in third down conversion. But last year they were excellent, good defensive line. Mahomes just found ways to just keep it going, buy time. That's what I considered mastery. Jalen Daniels was sitting on mastery down in Manhattan last Saturday. I thought his ability to see it, react to it, the throws, one that specifically that stands out was he escapes the pocket to the right, jukes a guy, hand overs him, dumps it off for the check down. They get 7 yards. And then on top of that, the throw from the right hash to the left sidelines to Trevor Wilson was an absolute rocket. It's a kind of throw that I thought they should have stopped the game, like when LeBron broke the scoring record and just walked out there and said, give me that ball. We need to wait a second to think about what just happened. I mean, it was one of the throws. I've not seen a throw in person as impressive as that. Talk about what you've seen in JD. And I thought that was as good as he's been since the Liberty Bowl. In terms of just play for play greatness. He was awesome.
Yeah. And, I think for a guy that has had a lot of really stupid comments made about him and disrespectful comments. I know fans are I'm not even talking about necessarily Kansas fans. There's some fans outside of Kansas that have been really rude and disrespectful to a kid that probably didn't deserve it. He's been nothing but an upstanding kid, a good kid, a hard worker who wants to be out there as much as anybody. And so I've heard a lot of really just kind of disrespectful, comments to that kid, and to see him play his best in a game like that, where, I think, that would have been That would have been that was a big opportunity for Kansas football, right? Because they've been through a lot this year, and there's been some inconsistencies from a win-loss perspective, and there's been some frustrations all year. But I think, ending the streak, especially after KU flat out should have beat Kansas State last year. I think, I even hear both sides of that rivalry will acknowledge that Kansas had K-State on the ropes, and then they kind of melted. They kind of fell apart after the drop pick 6. I saw Rich Miller on Twitter, by the way, talking about that. Like, my bad, y'all. Like,
my bad, bro. Yeah.
But, he picked the right time. And I think Jalen Daniels has looked like Jalen Daniels specifically coming out of the bye week, right? And we probably didn't acknowledge enough the rust that can come from, the prolonged absence and, some of the management of his injuries and some of the stuff that he's been through the last year to try to make sure that he was ready to compete. And, I think you saw some rust early on in the year, but boy, after this bye, these last 2 weeks specifically, they're seeing them dial up the run game a lot more for him. You're seeing him being willing to utilize his legs a lot more. And then I think that's spurring more creativity for him, right? Being more active, working outside of structure and going back to some of those throws and some of those things that Jalen Daniels was doing and why he was so highly regarded in the time that he's been playing at Kansas University. And it looked like the old Jalen Daniels. Now, I think there was still some, there was a couple moments that, in that game I'm sure he wishes he had back, right? Especially late in that game with the fumble, right? But they're not in that situation without him, right? And what he was doing in that game. And, he's looked so much better over the course of the last few weeks. And, I know the schedule's tough. There's 3 straight ranked opponents for this football team. I think they're going to get at least one of these. I really do. The way that this team's playing, I really think they're going to play spoiler somewhere here down the stretch because of the way that Jalen Daniels is playing and how this team, Lance Leipold talks about, the standard is the standard, whether you're 2-6, 6-2, 8-0, right? They're going to continue to play to that standard. And if they continue to do that, I think something good will happen, especially with the way that Jalen has been playing.
Absolutely. And, thinking about matchups down the road, especially with tough teams coming up, it's the reason why we like Kansas so much at the beginning of the season is that stylistically, these teams are good matchups for what this Kansas team is good at, specifically at quarterback. I think in the Big 12, there are a lot of RPO one-read quarterbacks. And when you have 2 long, aggressive corners that have played in the league for 4 straight years, it's hard to throw outside the numbers. As you see, Kansas State, I don't know if they threw a ball outside the numbers at all. It was almost exclusively near the hatches or inside the numbers, and there was nothing out there if they would have tried. So I think that when you have those types of teams, you're able to eliminate part of the field. And with Cornell Wheeler back, like the defense when Cornell plays, the defense gets enough stops to win games. They've done every week. Every week, you can look at the defensive numbers, and I'm going to go through a few of them too, because there's a lot of talk about, let's fire this guy, let's get rid of this guy, let's let some head rolls. Listen here. Last year, 27.3 points per game. This year, 27.7. Takeaways per game, 1.3 last year. This year, 1.9, 23rd nationally. Sack percentage, we lost Austin Booker to the NFL. What are we going to do? We're going to increase our sack percentage, 7.34 per game. Yards per carry last year, 4.6. This year, 4.5. Third down defense, 43% last year, 40% this year. Rushing yards per game, 168 last year, 170 this year. Very similar team. I mean, I know there were places where we'd like to see some big improvements, and we have, and it hasn't equaled wins, but it's not a product of what they are able to do in building a competitive football team. When you're looking at Iowa State, BYU, Colorado, you're looking, and Baylor's playing well too. You look at 4 tough games coming up, you really feel good about the matchups because what they're able to build inside the program, what you're seeing week to week, and what I'm seeing week to week is a competitive football team with a loaded group of talent behind these 30 seniors that I'm excited to see get out on the field. I look at a guy like Taylor Davis, who is the 4th string safety. How many people have a 4th string safety as good as Taylor Davis?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah.
Which ones? That guy's a 4th string safety. Since he inserted in the lineup, they've been just as good or a little bit better just because of how aggressive he is. He's a great tackler. He's a traditional read and react safety. Like, this program is on the up. Don't allow the scoreboard and the record this year to confuse you about what this program can be. I'm seeing all the signs of what this program can be, Kent.
No, I'm with you, and I think it might have even been Travis Goff that said something about how the road to success isn't necessarily always linear, right?
Right.
And this Kansas program has done some incredible things, and they've exceeded expectations year over year, and they've surprised so many people, and like this program and this program builder and Lance Leipold and company deserves all the credit that he gets. They dealt with a lot more this offseason than we probably acknowledged on the outside, and like losing one of the best guards in the National Football League right now, Dominic Young, and losing a elite pass rusher from in college in Austin Booker, and losing both coaching staff on both sides of the football, and key staff members on both sides of the football, and they weathered some of that, and they had their quarterback dealing with some rust, but like they're still all these games that they lost were moments. They were just small moments that were keeping them from winning some of these football games, and the process is still the same. There's a lot like the late first half struggles have obviously just been something that has ruined this team's record and has kind of put them in some really rough spots that they haven't been able to overcome. But it's not like you're not seeing a ton of blowouts. You're just seeing these small moments, and they haven't been good enough at times in some of these moments. And I understand that, but man, like I think about like you talking about some of these young guys, and in years prior, and like this is a hallmark of a healthy organization too, right? You think about some of these things like some of these older teams that. A lot of these young prospects, a lot of these young players, a lot of these highly touted players would have to see the field, by this time. And you're talking about like a guy like Taylor Davis in 5, 6, 7 years ago, he's probably, a starter, and maybe even starting a little bit quicker than he needed to, right? The hallmark of a healthy organization is you see all these young guys getting a chance to redshirt, getting a chance to kind of introduce themselves slowly into the mix, and getting, time to grow and develop. And ultimately this program is a developmental organization, right? And they've been able to, keep some of these guys and let them have the appropriate runway to get better, because they've put good football players out on the field. And like, when I go and look at this roster, like there's a few places here or there, but like they have the talent. They have the talent to be a 6-2 football team, which is why they were so highly regarded. It's just the results have not been there. But the talent is still there, and that's a positive sign for the future that they've been able to keep some of these young guys at bay because they still have, grown men playing on both sides of the football. And I think it's a healthy sign that they're able to redshirt some of these guys, or they're able to, let some of these veterans get their opportunities and play, because they're not short on talent. This team's not short on talent, and they're not going to be short on talent even after they lose 30 guys. They're going to be just fine because they got a really good foundation with some of these young players. I really do believe that.
Yeah, I mean, there's guys that I'm really excited about that I don't think the fan base has really even seen. Like guys like By Joe, and with twitchiness and explosiveness he has, the future of guys like having him, D. Miller, Dak Brinkley, Dylan Brooks. I mean, that's a talent pool that's as good as anybody in the Big 12, team for team. You move inside, they're playing. Javier Darrett was a big pickup from North Dakota State. He is the 3rd or 4th string defensive tackle, plays, but he's not a guy they're even counting on. And that's how good their group has been. Blake Harrod, finding guys like Blake Harrod from Iowa, under-recruited, 215 pounds as a junior. Now he's a 6'4", 285, 95-pound defensive tackle that turns heads every time he plays. So their ability to identify talent and develop talent, I think, is as good or better than it's ever been. It's what I talked about with Darryl a little bit that kind of throws me off. I'm used to seeing, it's going to take a year for your body development, and during that time, you're going to learn and blah, blah, blah. Man, these guys, one off season looked like they used to in 3 years, and now they're ready to go physically. Now it's just a matter of getting reps, understand the mental process. I called out Jamil Croft for that, about his physical improvement from when he arrived to where he is now. Like, that guy looks like he could project to play safety or corner over the course of his career. And I would not have said that when he walked in the door, because he was 165 pounds. Mm-hmm. So they just have a developmental program and talent that I think you're going to continue to see build on. And especially with some of the systems that they have, what they're doing from an offensive perspective. I absolutely loved that tackle over shift to that diamond formation on the 3rd and 4 where they threw it to Luke Green. They had double tackles wide. That was the kind of magic that we were used to in terms of seeing formations and different things. So I think they are all the way back in a lot of ways, and I'm excited to see how they progress moving forward. But Kent Swanson's here, and I want to talk running backs because I played running back, and I think that the conversation about running backs is going in a direction that I don't really like. I think that a lot of what's happened, so I think it's a top-down thing, right? So at the NFL level, there's not a need to draft running backs high because what you might owe them in their 4th and 5th year, they might be shot by then. They might have too many injuries. There's a lot of things, and not a lot of guys make it. Fair. Then you talk about, okay, I pay the guy the big money after that rookie contract. Too many miles on him, can't get through, except for 4, 5, 6 guys. Fair. But if you're talking about roster construction, team construction, running backs are vital. And you're starting to see that at every level. Now you're starting to see NFL teams facing 2 deeps that can't do anything with the football because they're not used to scheming against loaded boxes. They're not used to scheming every run gap and getting hat on a hat football. And that's at the highest level of football. Then you move down to the college level, dominated by running backs from a production standpoint. Ashton Genty is putting up a Barry Sanders-like season. That is absurd to me. I watched Cam Scatteraboo. He had 2 or 3 runs that kind of felt like Christian McCaffrey at Stanford. I'm not even joking. Like his ability to make people miss in the hole and shift people away. Like there are a lot of talented running backs at the college level. And, that doesn't even get me started on a guy like Devin Neal who can do it all. Talent, acceleration. Now he's getting to show his hands in the passing game, especially the last 3 weeks, just a complete back. Just talk about the running back position, what you're seeing as a whole in the game.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, I think you talk about the NFL level and like, you're right. Like teams are inviting, the run to agree. They're playing with these lighter boxes. They're staying in too high and they're not getting out of it. And some teams have adjusted well and some teams haven't. The Chiefs are a remarkably efficient team. Like I'll use the Chiefs as an example. They're a remarkably efficient team, right? When it comes to blocking these things up, they don't really have a guy that can kind of, take a 4-yard carry and turn it into 6, 8, 10, 12, 24. They do not generate explosive runs. Now, you might be, so they're turning around and hand the football a lot more. Their ratios right now in the run game are a lot more than they've been in recent memory. And so like when I look at it, just like from kind of keeping it a little bit local, and it applies to everybody else, but like I wish the Chiefs had, a dynamic back there. I wish they had an investment in I like Isaiah Pacheco. He's not an overly dynamic back. And so like from a looking at an NFL perspective, I'm looking at some of the backs in college football right now. And I'm going, man, I would love for the Chiefs to be making an investment in one of those guys because they are math changers. They are game changers. They're guys that can create explosive runs out of, more, they can extend a 4-yard play and make them more than that. And I never, you always hear that the National Football League's cyclical, right? And like it always starts from up top. And I don't know if I ever really thought we would get back to where we're at right now. If I'm being honest with the running backs, where they are so badly, teams need to have a little bit more investment in the running back at this position or at this point, because I don't think this too high stuff's going away for a while.
Absolutely not.
And if that's the case, teams are going to go back to getting bigger and they need to have more dynamic running backs. And so, the cycle's coming back to where I think, running back is back in a big way. And I think, a couple of teams were smart enough to pay a guy like Saquon Barkley. The market's starting to come back up from an NFL perspective, right? But look at all these backs in college football right now.
Yeah.
Like
it's amazing.
They're gonna get valued more appropriately this season, I think, coming out of the draft. Because first off, there's a ton of talented dudes, and Devin Neal's one of them. By the way, I saw Devin Neal. There's a guy, Nate Tice, I respect a ton. He does work for Yahoo Sports. I think he's one of the best football guys out there. He has Devin Neal in his top 60 players in the draft this year, right now.
Absolutely.
Devin Neal's getting some love here. So, Yeah, I think the running back is back in a big way, coming from the top down. I think, and I think you're going to see that this offseason.
Yeah, I like that you started local with the Chiefs. I'm a guy that likes Pacheco too because he runs like he's being paid rations. Like he doesn't even get a salary. Like he just gets room and board. I mean, that's the type of runner he is.
Yeah.
But he takes a lot of steps in between cuts, a ton. He's also like he's not a good outside of his hips runner. He's got tight hips. Fun runner, and I think a good number one back, but not like a skilled running back, a guy that can like use his skill to make. He's a will player, which there's nothing wrong with will players and running back, but skill players are a whole different animal. If you look at like drafting Jahmyr Gibbs when the Lions did, they were the laughing stock, right? Oh, why would you take such an excessive accessory? And this guy's sprinting for touchdowns from 70, 80, 60 yards weekly. And I think that shows you just one way where you can start to impact the game that way. But then I'll take it to my local favorite team, which is not local at all, the Las Vegas Raiders, who have running backs on their team who only can run one scheme. And I'm not joking. Zamir White last year was a promising player over the last 3 weeks. He's a guy from Georgia, 4th-round pick, 5th-round pick, a guy with high expectations. Last year looked really good in a man scheme. He had a couple games, 20 carries, 100 yards. He's in a zone scheme now and cannot get a yard, to the point where it's like people think the offensive line's bad. And you watch the all-22, the offensive line's okay. It's just a guy that's not used to reading zone, not used to setting up blocks, not used to using that type of integrity. And beyond the running back position itself and how we evaluate talent, I think it's a system thing. Because when you get to these two safety, these two high looks, there are teams that cannot run the ball to loaded boxes. I think that's a product of RPO, and I think that's a product, you're seeing that in the NFL as well, because what RPO is for a quarterback in a system is a numbers game. You're just counting. If you get to 6 and you like your numbers, you're 6 on 6, 7 on 6, you're running it. But what are you doing when it's 6 on 7, 6 on 8, and you still need to run the ball? There's a lot of programs in college football and a lot of NFL teams that can't solve something that should be very simple, hat on a hat football. And I'm just excited to see the ways in which that changes. Does a guy like Derrick Henry become coveted? Because this guy is also on an NFL record-breaking pace. The only thing stopping him is his offensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. They get into games and he's got 11 carries when he probably should have 16 or 17. So there was all these teams that said, Derrick Henry, he's old. He can't keep this up. But I think that what you're seeing is that investment is worth it at the NFL level, and I think it's going to help guys. I'm glad you mentioned the Devin Neal piece. I think it's going to help guys like Devin Neal. But if you're an NFL team that has a pretty good nucleus like the Kansas City Chiefs, I mean, would you love to have an Ollie Gordon or a Devin Neal or I don't know if they'll be high enough for the Boise State guy, but
Travion Henderson, Quinshawn Judkins,
they're everywhere.
Nick Singleton, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, for sure, man. Like, I think, I think they're going to be more coveted. And like, this is kind of we'll find out if it's like a true renaissance and how long it lasts and all that stuff. But and getting a little too like in a vacuum of 2025, like it's not a great NFL draft class across the board. So I think the running backs are going to go higher than they might in other drafts, anyways. But I also think these running backs are getting appropriately valued because they're really good football players. And I think there's a lot of teams that wish they had a little bit more dynamic. And like the Chiefs have won 2 Super Bowls despite having somebody like that, and like understanding and acknowledging that at times some of this has nothing to do with talent and ability, but also has to do with the longevity of in season even, right? The average running back, I think, plays 12 games a season or something like that at this point. It's like there's a little bit of that baked into it. But and like, look, the Chiefs lost their starting running back and they signed a guy off the street, and he's played really well, and they've put a lot of carries on him, and we'll see how long he's able to kind of withstand that. But at the same time, like having that kind of player on your roster changes things. And like, I think explosive plays in the pass game are getting harder to come by. And then that's exactly what these teams are doing. They want to reduce the explosives. They want to keep a lid on things and keep teams from getting down the field with these big explosive plays and forcing long drives and tightening up in the red. It's no longer whether or not we can give up 0 points. It's whether or not we can just force field goals, right? The mentality has changed. So the invitation to run the football is different. And sometimes you just need more explosives in the run game. And like for the Chiefs specifically, I'll use them as the example. They don't have any explosives in the run game. They are very positive plays down. They're getting positive plays consistently, 3-4 yards. They're putting themselves in phenomenal situations on third downs, but they aren't getting a ton of explosives in the pass game either because of the way teams are putting the threat, to lid on it. So, blocking things up well and adding a dynamic back into the mix. I think there's a lot of teams that probably wish they had a little bit more juice in the running game this year. I know the Chiefs are one of them, and I'm sure there's plenty of them else. So, I think all these guys are going to get drafted high. I think Devin Neal's going to get drafted pretty high.
Yeah, and I hope so. I mean, the guy is a complete player. I think he's reached that level to me. I think all my favorite backs that I've seen in the Big 12 have reached this point to where the second level, it's a joke. Like, you not only can you not tackle him, you can barely touch him. Yeah. I think Breece Hall hit that. Bijan Robinson was that. And Devin Neal has hit that same type of, at the second level, one-on-one, no chance. And that type of, like you said, that's the explosive. That's the explosive right there. Is I have played defense on this thing well. I have done everything that I'm supposed to do, but now I've got to tackle a big-time difference maker. And I think that's what's so interesting to me about the season that Ashton Jeanty has had. When you look at his highlights, it's not a bunch of perfectly blocked plays. I mean, it's him turning a vertical seam that's the size of a piece of notebook paper into a 47-yard run. These guys are special. They're balanced, special. I truly believe at Kansas, at their biggest struggle, where they weren't in rhythm, where they couldn't figure out, if all they did was give the ball to Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw running and passing, I think they could win a bunch of games. If all they did was hand the ball off to Devin Neal, Daniel Highshaw, let me throw Sevy Morrison in there, because every time he touches the ball, it's about 18 plus. So, he's doing his thing as well. But I think that is the part of the game that is coming back. That's the cycle that's returning. And I couldn't be happier, and the timing couldn't be better for a guy like Devin Neal and the season he's having and what that might project into the pros. But as you look at it, what do you see for Devin Neal as a pro player and the type of level you would put him at?
Yeah, so I think Devin Neal is a day 2 running back. I think that's kind of where I've got him right now, and I think he's a really smart football player. He's got great anticipation in that second level, like you're kind of talking about, and he does a great job setting guys up at the second level too. And he makes those guys miss with great consistency. He runs hard. He's always falling forward. I think he's really efficient in his decision making. He's not trying to get too crazy and try to stop his feet. He's trying to solve problems downhill on the move, right? He's not just kind of slowing down and going risk reward. He's got a really good kind of calculation in his head on on his decision making. That's something I'm really impressed with, right? I think I'm curious to see what his numbers are going to be from a juice perspective, from a 40-yard perspective. Like, that's going to be one of the big questions for him. If he's a 4.6 guy, he's probably going on in around 3. If he's 4.5, low 4.4s, like, he's probably going to go earlier than that, right? Like, that's going to be one of the questions, is like how much is going to be able to run away from dudes in that setting. But well built back too. Like, if you're talking about a guy that's 215, good contact balance, good vision, good anticipation, and makes guys miss, but he makes them miss in a way that I think translates well to the National Football League. Some of these Ashton Jeanty runs, and don't get me wrong, I think Ashton Jeanty's an all-world talent, right? Yeah. Some of the runs and some of the plays that he makes are not going to be there in the National Football League. Now, he's got plenty of other plays, believe me, that will translate, right? But I think a lot of what Devin does as a runner translate well to the National Football League. I think, in the passing game, he's still got some work to do. But at the same time, pass pro's great. Hands are solid. Maybe not the most dynamic route runner, but if I'm being honest right now, the way the NFL is, you don't need to be an overly dynamic route runner right now to catch the football, because a lot of the backs are getting work in the flats anyway. They're not really running as many routes. Eyes. Yeah, you don't want to. They're not getting out in the route as consistently either. So you're getting a lot of basic route concepts. So I think he's set up nicely. I really do think he's set up nicely to have a nice NFL career. And I think teams are going to value him. I get why he's getting top 60 looks by a guy like Nate Tice. Like, I understand why he's getting that kind of love.
Now, I don't know if you even think all these players are NFL players, but I want to stay in the Big 12. Mm-hmm. Give me a ranking on. I'm going to throw this guy in there. I don't know if he's an NFL eligible or guy that NFL guys are looking at, but give me your rankings between Oklahoma State guy,
Ollie Gordon,
Scatterboo, Giddens, Neal. What would you rank those guys as NFL players? Projected NFL players.
I'd probably put if I'm putting tiers, I'd probably go Ollie Gordon and Devin Neal in like the top tier of those guys. I think depending stylistically what you're trying to do, I think Ollie might have a little bit more juice and a little bit more home run, but I also think there's more inconsistencies with him than Devin. So I think I'd put them in their own bucket. Giddens, I think those guys are probably top 100 backs.
Yeah.
Giddens, I think, is probably early day 3 guy. I think he's a really hard runner. I think he's got extremely good contact balance. He's going to be more scheme specific too, where I don't think he's like overly dynamic. I think he's a little bit stiff as a back with his change of direction, although I think he has good feel and anticipation, which I think he even saw last week. And I've been more impressed as I've watched him because I thought he was a lot stiffer 6 months ago than I do now. That's a good running back. And I think he's got a nice little NFL career ahead of him, but I think he's probably more of a day 3 type. Scatterboo, I think, is probably going to be a later day 3 type. I think his contact balance is insane, and I think he's just a powerful back. And I think he has made some really nice, runs and some, anticipation, the second level change of direction, all that kind of stuff. Speed is going to be a big question. Like if you look at like he's built kind of like a Carson Steele was, and he's a little faster than Carson Steele, which is why I think he gets drafted. But I don't think he's got like a second gear necessarily. That's really, I don't think he has that. And that's going to be something that kind of holds back his draft evaluation for me. So that's probably how I tier those guys. I think Giddens is probably in a tier above Scatterbo, and I think Scatterbo gets drafted, but like I think he's got some limitations, and those wind up the stop start, some of the long speed stuff that really does start to show up in the NFL. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to compare him entirely to Carson Steele, but like lack of burst, but great power. That's kind of what you're seeing out of Carson Steele, and he's not really able to generate those explosives either.
Yeah, that's kind of I only brought up Cam Scatterboo because I'm a Raiders fan, and we drafted a guy named Dylan Lobb, and I don't know what he's doing in the NFL. I don't want to be like extremely critical of a guy that really hasn't played. However, he was a 4.59 guy. He played at New Hampshire, and he's very blah to me. And when I watch Scatterboo as a football player is far better than Dylan Lobb, just in terms of play-to-play football. They rely on him to run option routes and get open on third down. Even when he's split out in the slot, he runs with power all the time. And I think just fit in on a football player. He's going to make a team regardless if he gets drafted. I just think he's an interesting thing to think about, and I think he's a guy that is going to stick around the league no matter what his evaluation is.
So I think you're dead on about that, because like he's definitely like intangibles wise, like that's definitely a dude I want on my football team, and he plays so hard, he runs so hard, he plays with such violence. And when you're talking about teams in 2 high, like it is very similar to what you're seeing out of like Carson Steele. So like the physical limitations, can show up at times, but the violence, the physicality, the toughness, the energy that you maintain and sustain, like those things are hard to argue about Scatterbo. And like that's kind of, that will be what keeps him around for a long time in the NFL. I agree. I think he's got a future.
Yeah, and I see Giddens. I'm not overly impressed with Giddens. I just think he's good at making people miss. He's good at breaking tackles. And I think he'll be a guy, like you mentioned, that can be a third down type back, a guy that can pass pro, get out in the pass game, a screen draw kind of player. I do think he has a pro future. I do think he's a good player. But I did want to talk running backs with the NFL running back guru, Kent Swanson. This guy just knows NFL stuff. He knows running backs. I know running backs. So that's what this was. I appreciate you guys joining the booth review to talk Kansas football. Again, Kent, thanks for joining us. We will be back again after Kansas, before Kansas gets a chance to take on Iowa State and maybe shake up the college football playoffs. I think they have everything they would need to do so. Once again, thanks for joining us, Kent.
Absolutely, man. I missed doing this. I'm so glad I got to hang out with you here.
Yeah, we'll get another weekend once we start shocking the world. But you'll get back with this booth review. Thanks for joining us.